Right. Good afternoon, one and all, and welcome to our webinar on managing common repairs for Inverclyde. My name's Stephen Kelly. I'm one of the education and training officers with Under One Roof, and I'll be doing the webinar today. The ground rules are, I'll go through these presentations, hopefully it'll take no more than about half an hour, 40 minutes. If you do have any questions, because I can't multitask and I'm old as well, please use the chat box or the Q&A box and we'll get round to questions at the end. However, what I should also remember to say, because I keep on forgetting about is, you don't have to take notes because everybody who's registered for the webinar will receive a recording of the webinar and a copy of the slides. Okay. So without further ado, we'll get started, see if these slides work. We have liftoff. Okay, hopefully you can see those slides, and more importantly, you can hear me get my way through this with a touch of man flu, but don't worry, I'm not looking for any sympathy. So the first slide is the home page of Under One Roof Scotland. If you go to our website and put in Under One Roof Scotland, this is what will appear on your screen. So the top banner there covers things from maintenance, management, retrofit events, about us, support us, you know, we always want some money. But probably the most important box up there is the top right hand corner, Ask an Expert box. If you hit that box, that'll open into a submission page, an inquiry page. There's no names, no pack drill. All we ask for is your email address, your local authority, so we can go back and ask them for money at the end of the financial year, and whether you're an owner, a landlord, a housing professional, whatever it is. Please put your inquiry in there, and that'll come to me, and between myself and Kat, our other education and training officer, we'll get back to you with a detailed reply within a few days. It depends how busy we are, but we'll get back to you in a few days. And if your inquiry is a bit more complicated than me saying, yes, you can do that, or no, you can't do that, we will put a hold and reply to you and get back to you with a detailed reply, because we have some board members who are solicitors, surveyors, who'll be able to give us more information to try and reply to your inquiry. Okay. Okay, there we go. So I put this slide in because the definition of a tenement flat changed in 2004. Primarily before then, we understood that tenement flats were the ones we see in Greenock, Port Glasgow, Glasgow, Dundee, all throughout the country. Primarily red sandstone or granite or white sandstone. So those are the properties we always believed were tenement flats. However, in 2004, the Tenement Scotland Act defined a tenement flat as basically, I'm not going to say horizontal and vertical and all that legal gobbledygook that's there, but generally speaking, we're now talking about a cottage flat or four in a block. So with those from a housing background, all those four in a blocks and cottage flats are now classified as tenements, as are converted villas. So in the west end or the east end of Greenock, I think, heading towards Gourock, you may well find these big villas that are there that may now be converted into 3, 4, 5, 6 flats. They are treated as a tenement as well. And also the high-rise multi-storey flats or deck access properties, they're also classified under the terms of the Tenement Scotland Act as a tenement flat. So why are we here, or why was Under One Roof created in 2021, I think? The reason we created it is there's problems with housing stock, not just flats, but housing stock throughout the whole of Scotland. And in the 2023 House Condition Survey, it identified there was nearly 3 million homes within Scotland. They did do another condition survey in 2025, but it wasn't as detailed as the one in 2023. But the 2023 one identified that there's nearly 900,000 tenements in Scotland, and many of them are in poor condition. Okay, some housing stock has got critical disrepair and could be deemed as dangerous. So approximately 20% of those tenement flats, or those houses, should I say, had urgent disrepair to what they class as critical elements. And the critical elements are the usual suspects: The roof, the walls, the windows, and external doors. Those are the things. You walk along the street, you look up and go, that needs some tender loving care. So it probably needs some critical disrepair, or needs repaired to bring it back up to some sort of tolerable standard. However, when they did the condition survey in 2023, they changed the goalpost slightly to include any properties that didn't have a smoke alarm or a carbon monoxide detector. And because they didn't have those in their property, they were deemed as below tolerable standard. Now, those who are old like me or have been experienced in housing probably think we believe what looks like a below tolerable standard property, i.e. it's not wind and watertight, the roof's falling in, it needs, as I say, tender loving care. However, what the condition survey stated, that MD who didn't have a smoke alarm or a carbon monoxide detector is now classified as below tolerable standard. And obviously that would impact on the repairing standards for landlords. Another issue that crops up is that masonry and fabric falls off buildings. Now, fortunately, since the early 2000s, there was an incident in Edinburgh where unfortunately an Australian student got hit on the head with somebody coming off a roof, and unfortunately she died. Touch wood, we've not had any major incidents of that ilk since then, but I did a Freedom of Information request to all local authorities in 2025, and they all recorded, or not all recorded, and a total, there was nearly £2,000, 2,000 incidents recorded by local authorities as possible dangers. Now that could be something simple like gutters have slipped, or roof tiles after storm damage need replaced, or chimney pots that are a bit dangerous. But it's important that owners and landlords look at their properties, maybe coming back from work, parking the car, getting off the bus, off the train, because if something happens and something falls off the roof, and hopefully doesn't hit anybody, but it could damage their other pride and joy, their car, then they'll be chapping your front door asking for recompensation and putting a claim in against the building. So it's important that buildings are looked after as a matter of course, because obviously we don't want anybody to get injured, or as owners, you don't want any more claims against your property for incidents that may be manageable, let's say. Because there are reasons why owners don't tackle repairs, and I've got 5 here that might help. First one's a simple one. Owners maybe are not aware of their responsibilities for tenement maintenance. They may have saved up all the hard-earned cash, got a loan off family and friends, whatever it is, and they've bought their pride and joy. They've got their first flat, and they're so happy, so over the moon. They've got their house, and that is all their focus is on. But for whatever reason, and there's not a lot of saying nobody really checks their titles, or the solicitor hasn't made them aware of common areas, they don't know they're aware they're part of a share to repair the common areas within a flat, within a close use area building. So they're maybe not aware that they're responsible for either the common areas or a mutual repair within a building. However, they may be aware. They may go, I've got to help looking after the building. But they may have a lack of knowledge on how to tackle these repairs and how they go about it. How do I get the ball rolling? How do I speak to the neighbours? Are the neighbours going to be interested? How are we going to get quotes in? All that sort of stuff. So there's a process involved, which we'll come on to further on the webinar. But even if they're aware that they have to pay a share towards managing the common repairs, they might not be aware of how to do about it. So if they are aware and they've got the process involved, another hurdle for them will be the cost of repairs from contractors. So since probably 2020, as a result of Brexit, you'll then have the fact that material costs, I'm not going to say went through the roof because Rebecca doesn't like me saying go through the roof, but they've been getting higher. And if so, material costs have increased. We added to the fact that we had COVID in 2019, 2020, and you have a lot of contractors who weren't able to work for at least a year or two. They're now trying to recoup their losses over those periods and maybe charging more money for the labour costs. So what may have been £50 an hour labour costs may well have doubled in price to £100. I know I had a plumber out my house 6 months ago, and then before they put the bum in the car, I was getting charged £80 an hour. So you add those two things together, cost of repairs in terms of supply materials, supply costs of materials, and labour costs have been excessive. You add that, you've then got limited financial resources to pay for the work due to the cost of living, energy costs, shopping costs. So people have less disposable income to pay for the repairs that they want to do. So it's a yin and yang thing. Yes, I want to pay for the repairs. I've only got X amount of money to pay my share. Oh, the quote I'm getting from a contractor is double the price of the resources I've got, or the financial resources I've got to pay for the work. And unfortunately, there's a lack of funding sources out there for local authorities and the Scottish Government. In an ideal world, the only way to solve all these issues we've got at tenement flats, it's going to cost billions of pounds to do it. And the money isn't there. And it does go to the local authorities like Inverclyde Council. They've got funding issues as well. So the money they've got available to pay for repairs and give out, as grants or missing shares is reduced. They don't have an empty pot of money or a vast pot of money to pay for those repairs. Big thing, and we get inquiries to ask an expert, and apart from chimneys, no keen in chimney inquiries. I'm not quite keen in insurance inquiries either, because there's no real simple answer. Or there wasn't a simple answer until we held a webinar in February, which you can find on our YouTube channel. Don't worry, I'm not presenting it, so you have to look at this ugly git again. However, we did an insurance webinar done by a surveyor and Howden's Insurance Services. And basically, these are the 5 or 6 bullet points that came out from that. Under the Tenement Scotland Act 2004, owners must have sufficient insurance to reinstate your building. An example of this was there was a fire in Perth 2 years ago, I think. Unfortunately, a couple of people died in it. So everybody was decanted from the property and moved out. Now, it turns out they all want to rebuild the property, but only 4 people have got insurance. The other 4 didn't bother with insurance. It's one of those things that will never happen to me. So they've now got an impasse. The 4 owners have got insurance, 4 owners didn't have insurance. I suspect the owners that don't have insurance will just have to take the hit and sell the property, which probably won't be market value. But it's imperative that owners have insurance and building insurance for their property. But what we are saying, or what the RES recommendation is, that the reinstatement value could be higher than what you've sold the property for. Okay, so you may have bought your property through market value for £100,000. Great. But the actual cost of rebuilding it could be double that. So your insurance should cover the total cost of reinstating the building to its original state. Okay. And if you don't have the proper cover, then the insurance company may not pay the full amount of your claim. So if you've got an issue to the roof, for talk's sake, with storm damage and the roof flies off, and you put a claim in to replace the roof, but your insurance is only covered for £100,000, they may not pay out totally if you've not covered it for the total reinstatement value. So to get a reinstatement value, what we're saying is you should get a survey carried out by a qualified surveyor, and that should be done every 3 to 5 years to make sure it keeps up with any changes in costs. Okay. The other insurance, if you're doing building insurance, it should cover, pardon me, both inside and outside the building. So obviously we're talking roofs and walls and slabs and all that sort of stuff. But there may be issues in the back court like your bin shelters. So any building insurance should cover all areas. If you've got a mortgage companies are now making it adequate. Apart from saying we gave you a mortgage, they're now ensuring that you get adequate insurance in place to protect their investment. And unfortunately, the bottom line is, as was proved in Perth, if owners don't have any insurance, or they do have insurance that isn't sufficient, they will have to pay their share of the costs, even though it's not their fault. So as I say, we'd recommend, if you've got time, you go to our YouTube channel and check out the webinar on building insurance. I think it was done around about February. Okay. So, obvious slide, which people should know, but we put it in anyway. And this is maintenance obligations for owners and landlords, or owners, because landlords are owners, generally speaking. The individual. So anything within the flat is your responsibility. Okay? The walls, the doors, the windows. You will get the odd query from people saying the fault of the windows could be outside the window. So we'd have to look, trace and find out what the actual fault is. But generally speaking, we're saying anything inside the house is the owner's responsibility. Common areas cover the usual suspects: roofs, gutters, chimneys, the drainage, external walls, close windows, closing stairs. Okay. However, there's another curveball in there, and that may well be that the repair may well be mutual. As opposed to being split 8 ways, it might only be split by 2, 3, 4 ways. Okay. And because it goes with a flow, this webinar, there we go, mutual repair slide. As I say, I'm not going to talk about chimneys, hate chimneys. The reason I hate chimneys is there's no straightforward. You might see a chimney and it goes down inside the building, but we know by experience it doesn't always go to every flat inside the building. It might miss out 2 up and go into ground floor. So information can be found on our website under chimneys for more detailed knowledge on that. However, what I've done is I put a picture in there of a tenement building. And the one I'm going to refer to is the drain pipe. So you may well see a drain pipe going out, one going down one side of the building. If that drain pipe is only servicing the flats of 01, 112, 131, only they will be responsible for the cost of repairing that drain pipe. Okay. You may well have a drain pipe that actually covers both closes. So it might go down the middle of the building, and you might have property number 5 and property number 7. But that drain pipe goes down the middle of those flats. Only the people on 02, 12, 2232, and another flat 01, 112, 131, so I can't remember, will be responsible for the cost of those repairs. Okay. And the details within the titles will explain that. What is a mutual responsibility and who's responsible for those repairs? The other one that crops up under mutual is your close and stairs. Now, you may well have properties within Inverclyde where you get close, where you've got 2 houses either side of that close entrance. So if you're repairing the nosings or the handrail on the stairs, unless the people from the main door flat have access to the close, they don't have to pay for that. So maybe a main door flat, you walk in, they've got a side entrance that gives them access to the close, then they'll be responsible for paying the share of any repairs to the stairwell. If they don't, then they're not responsible. Okay. And the same thing goes for adjoining buildings. You may well have chimneys that cover 2 buildings. If they do, they'd have to find out, 1, what flats they serve and who's responsible for that. So similar to the situation about the drainage, if you're talking about chimneys maybe going into 1 flat in 1 building and 1 flat in the other, then those 2 flats are responsible for repairing and paying for those repairs. Okay. Another one that crops up everywhere we go and do presentations, is commercial properties. Okay. So if you've got shops below your building, the first port of call is your titles and the real burdens to classify what their responsibility is for the repairs to that building. So is it just split 8 ways? Is it split 6 ways? Whatever it is. As I say, and I'll come on to legislation in the next slide, I think it is. Yeah, there we go. Is that if there's gaps in the titles, they may not mention responsibility for anything within the property. They may have missed it out. If it's not mentioned, then you can refer to the tenement management scheme. But the bottom line we're talking about commercial properties is that the owner of the shop is responsible for paying for the repairs. Okay, it won't be the tenant, unless that's also the owner, because the tenant of the shop will have a repair and lease agreement with the owner of the shop. So the owner of the shop is responsible for paying their share of repairs. Downside to that is that the shop share may be based on rateable values. Now, we know rateable values disappeared in the 1980s, I think, but they're still there for shops, which means they may pay a bigger percentage. The reason behind that is when you had Greenock Main Street in the 1980s were busy shops, so that's where people went and did their shopping. So the theory behind that was that shops are making more money than the owners in the flats, therefore they should pay more to get repairs done to the roof, for talk's sake. Okay, we know those times have changed, unfortunately, but the legislation hasn't changed accordingly. Okay, so if the house, a sort of shop is based, the shop share is based on the rateable value, the chances are they'll pay a bigger percentage. If they pay a bigger percentage, go up to 60%, what you might find is the shop owner sticks their head in the sand and says, well, I'm not paying for that. So depending on the importance and the seriousness of the job you're looking to get done, the owners could get together and decide as a one-off arrangement to reduce the cost of the shop. So depending what job needs done, you may negotiate or you can negotiate. We're not saying you should do this. We're just saying it has happened in the past where owners have made us aware that in a one-off arrangement to reduce the cost. So the shop's due 60%, it may reduce it to 40% or 30%, and the owners will then split the rest of it equally amongst themselves. Again, that'll come down to what the actual cost of the job's going to be, and whether the shop owner's willing to obviously will be happier to pay it less, but it depends what that less is going to be. Okay, if you are doing that, when it comes to using the one-off arrangement, always use proper procedures, as again we'll cover that in a slide further on. If you're looking for shop owners' details, you can check the Scottish Assessor's website. It's not always up to date, but it gives you a link anyway to have a look and see whether the shop owner's details are on there. So, the other one that crops up, hey, sound like Chris Martin here in Coldplay. Nobody said it's going to be easy. You've got mixed tenure properties, okay? And these are properties that are owned by the council, owned by housing associations. But generally speaking, if the social housing landlord has got majority ownership, generally speaking, if they do things by the book, then owners would pay the share of the costs. Where there's no majority ownership, so you've got a picture there of a six property building, there's maybe 3 owned by the RSL, Racial Social Landlord, and 3 owned by owners, then there's a stalemate to get the work done, unless again you can negotiate to get an agreement reached. The downside to getting jobs done is where the owners are in the majority. So 4 owners in that flat of 6 are private owners, 2 of the registered social landlord or local authority. You've got possible maintenance issues, and that has happened. And as there is discussions going on in higher powers than what we are to see if there's a way around about that. Okay. The key points we bring it to your attention is that even if you're in the minority as a private owner and your social housing landlord is in the majority, they must still adhere to the title deeds. They must still follow the same rules for common repairs as private owners. So whatever the rules are in the titles, in terms of getting quotes and splitting the costs, they must still follow those rules as gospel. Okay. So as I say, the first port of call for social housing landlord, registered social landlord, is the titles and the real burdens. However, the wee curveball here is, I think Right to Buy started off in Margaret Thatcher's days, it was probably early 80s, 1980s, is that if somebody bought their property through the Right to Buy scheme, the council, local legal team, may well have just given them a title deed. And it might not be as in-depth as people who bought the property in the late 80s. So you could have people up the same close with different rules for managing the common areas. Okay. However, as I've touched on before, and I say I'll come on to the legislation in a second, if the titles are silent or unworkable, in any case, so if you're talking about 2 people who bought the property through Right to Buy, people on the ground floor may well have different titles from the people on the top floor, then you default to the tenement management scheme. As I say, it's not an easy subject, mixed tenure, but there is, powers it be, having a discussion, seeing we come to a consensus for it. So, once you've got all that out of the way, and you've decided you want to proceed with works, there's 2 areas of relevant legislation that you have to adhere to. The first one is your titles. And part of your titles, there will be real burdens included in those titles, which explains who owns what, who's responsible for what part of the common area, how that's divided up, was it mutual or is it just common, and more importantly for you, how to make decisions and how the costs are split. Okay, so if the titles cover all the bases, they tell you all the rules are there, it's straightforward, then they must be followed. They're gospel, they're the Bible. You can't change that. That's the titles are there, all the areas are covered, how we manage repairs, and who's responsible for paying for it, and how we're going to split those costs, they must be followed. However, I can right here, properties used to have SASIN registers, which were created in 1671, and titles were then took over for them in 1816 or something like that. However, so that's pre-war. So let's go to the properties that were built pre-1919. The chances are, if they've got real burdens attached to them, or they did a condition attached to them, they might not cover all the bases. Okay, they might not mention all the areas when that building was built, and they haven't kept up with the times. If that is the case, and as I say, if certain parts of those titles don't cover all the areas, don't mention the roof, don't mention the stairs, there are steps into the property, then owners can default to the tenement management scheme, which was introduced in the 2004 Act I touched on before. Okay, should be more straightforward to carry out repairs. Should tell you the parts of the tenement that must be maintained, what counts as maintenance, how you should come to arrangements about that maintenance job, and how you're going to share the costs. The most important thing that the Act introduced was that the roof is now a shared responsibility. Say it with me, unless the titles say otherwise. Okay, so prior to that, the title said that top floor flats on both sides of the close are responsible for the roof, they maintain that roof. If that is missing from the titles, then everybody's got to pay a share, irrespective of where they stay in that building. So if you're in the ground floor property or you're a shop, unless the titles say that the owners of the top floor flat are responsible for the repairs, everybody's got to pay a share. Now, newer developments, that'll crop up where you've got lifts, and people on the ground floor have got to pay a share of lift. Although you'll get inquiries and we don't use a lift. Well, it's not to stop using the lift, but you actually still have to pay a share of the lift maintenance. So the bottom line, if the titles cover all the bases, explain how the costs are divided, how you're sharing costs, etc., they must be followed. If there's anything missing on the titles, or even the shared costs don't add up, I'm actually dealing with an inquiry at the moment where they've done the shared costs, which is complicated, and fortunately I don't think I have got in this presentation. We're here all day trying to explain it, where if properties are 1.5 times size bigger than other properties in the flat, you then got to measure the floor area within the same flat, add it all up, take away the figure you first thought of, and hopefully that comes to 100%. If that doesn't come 100%, then you can default to tenant management scheme. You can do a whole session of legislation if you wanted, if you're suffering from insomnia. Anyway, you've got the titles, you've got the tenement management scheme. How are you going to go about using the tenement management scheme to get work done? And the same can go for titles. The first thing is to try and find out who the owners are and the landlords. Okay, owners is fairly straightforward. Every title should be registered on Register of Scotland. You can contact them either via their website or give them a call. And to check the details of properties, cost you about £3.60. It might change now, but it should be £3.60. Private landlords, first port of call would be the local authority landlord registration team. They may well have details of the private landlord. Failing that, you can check the Scottish Landlord Register, which, as it says, official register of landlord properties in Scotland. You may suspect one of the properties has been empty for a while. Now, again, if your local authority is an empty homes officer, check with them, or contact Scottish Empty Homes Partnership, who may be aware of the property being empty, why it's empty, and what the plans are. And they're going to bring it back into the local authority fold, or has been sold to somebody else. Okay. Shop owners we've touched on there. You can also search online. I believe there's things called social media out there nowadays. You can check Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, something chat box out there as well. Whatever it is, You can search online, you may find the details there. Or last resort is you could hire a sheriff officer and a private detective to find out who they are and where they're staying. Okay. The reason we need those details is that if you're using the tenement management scheme, there's a decision-making process we would recommend you adhere to. Because if you don't adhere to this, then an owner can appeal against the decisions, any decisions, if you've not followed these procedures. Okay, so you have a property of 8 flats. I move in and I'm the bad apple, and I'm not willing to play ball with MD. So to ensure I pay my share, we would recommend you follow these procedures. Call a meeting, at least 48 hours. All those that are in business or have worked before will understand everything has to be recorded in writing. The purpose of the meeting, an agenda, any minutes, any action points coming from that meeting. Okay. We'd absolutely put that if you're calling a meeting, make people aware of what the meeting's about. Whether it's a roofing job, front door job, slabbing, whatever it is, make people aware of why you're calling the meeting. Okay. When the decision is being agreed, all owners again must be contacted in writing. You may want to support that with photos, quotes from contractors, whatever it is, to support your case to get particular works done. And again, make sure your fellow owners know what the story is and what you're going to do next. Okay. In terms of voting, so you hold a meeting, that's when you want to proceed with a new roof for the property. 1 vote per flat, irrespective of how many people stay in that flat. I've come in a situation where I used to work in care and repair. You might have 3 people on the title, doesn't matter. It's only 1 vote per flat. Interesting, an owner can nominate another person, a letting agent, factor, mother, father, whatever it is, they can nominate somebody to vote on their behalf. However, if you have done the proper invite to a meeting, properly made decision is binding on all owners, even if they disagree. So if you have a meeting and all 8 people turn up and 5 out of the 8 people want to proceed with the works, that's what happens. The people who didn't agree can, by law, appeal, and I think it's 28 days they've got to appeal to a sheriff officer that the decision wasn't properly made. But again, if you followed the proper procedures, they shouldn't have a leg to stand on. But it's ensuring that you have followed those procedures. Okay. And as I say, a majority decision required unless the titles say otherwise. Some titles may mention the fact is it could be 2/3 or 3/4, but generally speaking, it's majority decision. 5 out of 8 in favour says yes. However, you may find a situation where you can't agree on it, and a tied decision, i.e. 4 out of 8 or 6 out of 12 or 5 out of 10, is not a majority decision. And in that situation, there we go. It goes with a flow, doesn't it? I mean, you can always then go to enforcing repairs. So the Tenement Scotland Act introduced these 2 elements to it. Duty to maintain and emergency repairs. And these are repairs that basically can't wait for a meeting. Well, could go away for a meeting. We have a meeting. I want a new roof because water's cascading into my property. And the 4 people on the ground floor flats and 1 up flats doesn't affect them. We're not going ahead with it. Okay? Doesn't affect us. If you can provide enough evidence that water's cascading into your flat, you can then go ahead and arrange those works under the duty to maintain legislation and then charge the other owners accordingly if they're liable for their shared costs. Okay? Same goes for emergency repairs. Generally speaking, you're talking about roofs. You could be talking about it could be chimney works. We touched on before that masonry thinking of falling off the building, or an interest in health and safety. It could be chimney, it could be water, whatever it is. These are issues that have to be tackled and you don't have time to hold a meeting. Now, it's a fine piece of legislation. The downside to it is those people are affected 9 times out of 10 have to find the money in advance, pay the contractor, get the work done, and then pursue their neighbours for their share. But recently we've had a couple of inquiries cropped in where people are disputing whether the works carried out justified the duty to maintain an emergency repair legislation. So that's not for me to decide. That's not for a sheriff's officer to decide or a solicitor to get involved. to decide whether the work covered these two bits of legislation. But I say the good bit of legislation, the negative side of it is you have to probably find the money to pay for the job. And then you may have hassle try to pursue your other neighbours for their particular shares. Okay. So, you've had your meeting, everybody's voted in favour, or six out of them voted in favour. We always put this slide up to deal with contractors. Okay, it's finding a good contractor. I wouldn't use yellow pages. I wouldn't deal with people chatting my front door. There are recognised websites out there. First port of call, you can contact a local authority. They may have a trusted trader scheme. Failing that, you have the trusted trader scheme itself. I know a couple of local authorities in Scotland use the Buy with Confidence website. You have Trustmark. You have Check a Trade out there. You have My Builder. You have all these registered websites where contractors have to pay to join them. And there will be comments about their performance, good, bad, and different. And that's up to you to decide whether you believe comments that are made. Pardon me, is it the own contractors put the comment in? Who might say? But we would always recommend you maybe use websites to find contractors. However, even having sourced a contractor, there's other questions you can ask yourself. Like, do they have public liability insurance, health and safety? Do they have experience to do the work you're looking for? Are they a jack of all trades or masters of none? Are they splitting themselves too widely? Okay. And is a guarantee or warranty insurance provided? So there's other checks you can do yourself. You can use the famous social media to check out. You may find comments on all the previous ones I talked about, Facebook, Instagram, pardon me, Trustpilot. You may be able to use them and find out if there's any comments about these companies. However, once you have identified a contractor, we would always recommend you do a proper tender process, and please include all you're looking to get done in the specification. We had an inquiry last month come in from somebody who's complaining about the contractor because when they'd done the work to close, they hadn't painted the walls. When we asked them, did you ask the contractor to do it? I went, no, I just thought they'd follow up and do it. And now they're going to charge them more money. So please make sure that everything you want done is included in the specification. Okay. In an ideal world, you would ask for at least 2 tender prices. We know it's not always easy. Some contractors just want to be guaranteed they're going to get the work and they don't want to be involved in a tender process. It's what we'd reckon. In an ideal world, you get 3, but try at least 2 tender prices to compare, like for like. Touching on that, the final selection we recommend shouldn't be on price alone. And in our life, I'm a member of a housing association board, and we put out a gardening contract. When the contractors come in, was £2,000 cheaper than the next price. And we investigated it, they'd actually missed out 3 streets. I didn't know you did the Crescent, so that sort of thing. So make sure you investigate low prices. In fact, you can actually do a checklist yourself and tick off what they've actually put in terms of material costs, labour costs, what they're going to do, as long as we take to do the job. And again, we'd agree project management issues. When you're going to start, who's going to manage it? Can you provide progress reports? A big thing would be maybe consider contingency costs, because they don't know what they're going to get into until they start stripping it back. And I worked in care and repair. We did a lot of disabled adaptations. And I do it many times when they were doing the work and they took the bath out, they found wet rot or dry rot under the bath, which is going to increase the costs. So consider that. Put in a certain figure for contingency costs. If they don't use it, you'll get it back. And put in a completion date as well. Paying for repairs. Bottom line here is if somebody is responsible for paying their share repair, they must pay it. Okay. If the titles say they must pay for something, they've got to pay for it. If you don't use that and use the tenant management scheme, again, that'll make it aware whether you're splitting it 8 ways or 10 ways or 12 ways. People have to pay their share. Okay. Payment options open to your local authority. The Inverclyde do have a mission share scheme when resources are available. But unlike the grant system, which is no longer in place, missing shares scheme is there's hoops to jump through. You have to fill in an application form. They will consider your request to pay your share of any particular job, but it can only be agreed before the work starts. So you can't have the work completed. Somebody chaps your door and gives you a bill for £1,000, and then you go to local authority and go, can you pay my share? That can only be agreed before the work starts. The other things to make you aware for missing shares, there will be an admin fee added and interest rate, and it will be recorded on your title. So the only one I know offhand that did South Ayrshire last year was that they will charge £300 an administration fee, and they'll charge you 10% interest rate. So they would record that on the title, say they gave you £10,000 to pay your share. Means when you sell that property, you pay back £10,000 plus the £300 admin fee and the 10% interest was £1,000 in my mind. That means you'd have to pay back 11,300. So I say it's not free money. One, if the local authority agrees to fund your share, you'll pay it back when you sell the property, and it won't just be simply a borrowed 10 and some paying back 10. Okay. You can stick money away for a rainy day, open your own savings account, or you could consider joining a credit union. You could borrow through a commercial loan or equity release. You may well have equity on your property, but we always recommend you take financial advice from a financial advisor before you consider going down that route. You could look at opening a joint maintenance account between yourself and your neighbours, or a building reserve fund. We know it's not easy at the moment to open a joint maintenance account because banks are treating these joint maintenance accounts as business accounts, and therefore you'll have charges added onto it. But if you were to check the SCVO, so Scottish Council Voluntary Organisation website, they have information on banks that are willing to open joint maintenance accounts for people. Okay. If an owner is unable to pay, we would advise you to contact them to contact the Citizen Advice and or the Money Advice Centre. Again, my anecdote story in here is that being a member of the Housing Association, one of our tenants was unable to pay the rent. She was referred to a welfare benefits officer who managed to get her £9,000 in backdated benefits. It was a generation that didn't want to ask her any help, and only when the going got tough, she approached the Housing Association and managed to get her £9,000 back. So there could be money out there that you're not aware of. Okay. However, you have those like me refuse to pay. Stick my head in the sand. Owners can proceed to instruct the repair. Start there in, just send them an invoice. You've done the proper procedures. That's fine. You don't pay your share, we'll see you in court. So you could raise action in the Sheriff Court. Simple procedure is that anything below £5,000 costs £22, less than £300, and more than that if it's over. The downside to simple procedure is the plain words. It's not a simple procedure at all. You would have to provide evidence. So everything we touched on before in proper procedures is people would prove that people were invited to the meeting, what the content of the meeting was, what the agenda, what the minutes said, and what action points were. Okay. And over £5,000, you could use the ordinary clause procedure. And in that thing, you probably need a solicitor for that. Okay. You can certainly split the bill between the owners, 7 against 8. We know who the bad apple is. He's not willing to pay. But if he shares £1,000, and I'm not recommending you do this, we just know by historical contact has happened, it might be cheaper to split it 7 ways. Pay 7 ways over his £1,000, £175 each, round about there. It may be cheaper than going to court. Downside of the court is you're not guaranteed to win. The other thing you could do, and I know factors do this, is you could put a notice of potential liability on the property. I think it's £80 every time you do it. It has to be recorded every 3 years. Again, it's up to you to decide whether that's going to be viable for you and financially viable. But it means if you lodge a notice of potential liability on their property, they would have to pay that money back when they sell the property. Okay, nearly finished. Okay. I'll put a couple of slides in with property factors. You may have property factors down in the Inverclyde area, but the bottom line is to get this message across is that the factor works on behalf of the owner and not the other way about. The owner is responsible for maintaining the common parts of the building. And what they'll do is they may well appoint a factor, or a factor may well have been appointed on their behalf, but they work as an agent for the owners. The factor must understand all relevant legislation, provide services, manage the finances properly. So they've got rules and regulations factors must adhere to. And I say they're governed by the Property Factors Act. They must be registered. So anybody who's claiming to be a factor in Inverclyde has to be a registered company with the Scottish Government. There's a code of conduct. They must provide a written statement of service. And if they don't adhere to that, then owners can take them to the first tier tribunal. Okay. But the most important thing we talk about when we get factors complaints is for owners to check, pardon me, their written statement of service. The Code of Conduct covers 6 areas. And through that, any factor will whittle that down to a written statement of service. So they'll tell you how they appointed, what service they're going to provide, how they're going to communicate, how they're going to bill you, what they're going to do in debt recovery. So the most important thing to check, if you've got a factor, and you're not happy with the factor, is check your written statement of service, and that should detail how they're going to deliver the services and when they're going to deliver it. And I say it obviously includes a complaints policy and the small print at the bottom, how to end the arrangement. Okay. But I just a couple of quick slides on factors if you've got them in Inverclyde. Couple of slides on future legislation that's coming around the corner. One is AWAB's law that was introduced after a young boy died in Rochdale through dampness and condensation. The target date for introduction is the 6th of October this year, which means the landlords have an obligation to investigate and resolve any damp and mould complaints. Okay, we're actually doing a session on damp and mould in the future. Rebecca will keep you, comms officer will keep you right with the actual date about that. But we'll have a whole session on damp and mould. But just to make sure aware of the timescales, you'll have 10 working days to investigate the issue. You then have to provide the landlord, or the tenant, should I say, 3 working days after you investigated, and you've got another 5 working days to carry the work. To me, those timescales are a bit onerous. I don't see a lot of that being managed within 20 working days, 4 weeks. I don't see it, but those are the figures that are in the legislation at present. As I say, we've got a whole session on it in the future. The other bit of legislation, they say a week's a long time in politics. Well, the Tenement Maintenance Working Group was established in 2018. And in 2024, they managed to come up with 3 suggestions, one of which was a mandatory owners association. Again, it's not in legislation yet. I believe it's sitting in the Housing Minister's desk to look at it. And I suspect there'll be a lot of amendments when it goes through Parliament, but these are the key points. What they're saying is every tenement must have an owners association. Every flat owner must be a member. They've got to appoint a manager, and that could be somebody that stays in the property already, or it could be a property factor. You must have an annual budget, and you must hold an annual meeting. I say in a previous life as a factor, don't hold it against me. And we managed retirement homes, and what we did was we prepared an annual budget, presented it to the owners, and then the annual meeting a year later basically looked how we spent our money for the accounts meeting. So it's easier to be done, but again, I suspect there's going to be a lot of amendments in it. And when the person from the Scottish Law Commission was asked how long is this going to take, she said how long is a piece of string. But it has been, there was a consultation, Scottish Law Commission concluded that, done a paper, and it's now with the Scottish Government to look at. But as I say, I suspect there might be a lot of amendments in it. Okay, nearly finished. My Martin Luther King slide to make sure all those properties in Inverclyde work properly and we don't have to do repairs to them. Once check all owners have building insurance. The law allows you to do that. Tenement Scotland Act allows you to chap your neighbour's door and say, have you got building insurance? And if you have, let's see how much it's worth. Carry out regular inspections of all common areas. Don't just put your head in the sand. If you're walking in your clothes, try and identify it. Hopefully there's nothing needing done. But if you do identify it, we would always recommend you get gutters cleaned and roof checked annually. In fact, we had an inquiry in a couple of months ago where there was a roof problem. We went to the insurance company knocked them back because the roof had not been checked regularly. I think the last time the roof was checked was about 5-6 years ago. And as we know, insurance companies aren't keen to pay out. So we'd always recommend you clean your gutters and get roof checked annually from a technical perspective, also a financial perspective. You're going to chase insurance. You could consider getting ahead of the game and establish an owners association so you've got a focal point for each tenement. If possible, have a look at doing a planned maintenance schedule. Get your building surveyed every 5 years. Save for future repairs. So if you stay in a tenement flat anywhere in Scotland, unless you're really, really lucky, you're going to have to pay something towards repairs. Hopefully it's a minimal fee, but I say unless you're really lucky, somewhere along the line, You're going to have to pay a share of common repairs. If your building's factor, liaise with your factor. Okay. As we do additional site visits, regular meetings, it may cost you more money, but it may be worth it in the long term. Okay. So how can we help? There's useful information on our website. We've actually got a repair checker. We've got Ask the Expert service, which I touched on anyway, earlier, should I say. You can always subscribe for the monthly e-newsletter. It's free. You just subscribe for it, and Rebecca will send you a monthly newsletter with flavour of the month, investment inquiry of the month, and any other relevant information. And as I said earlier, we've got the YouTube channel. You can log into that, have a look at previous webinars, which will be useful for you. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. You know, once you see my facial switch off again, anyway. And you get the website underoneroof.scot or the email info@underoneroof.scot. Finally, we've got a feedback QR code, I believe it's called. You don't have to use your phone just now because, as I say, we will send you out the slides. But if you get sent out the slides, please click on this QR code and send us a reply to see how good or bad I did. And don't worry, I'm an old man, I don't care anymore. Hopefully you understood the webinar. As I say, if you don't, obviously with some questions. If you don't, then please, if you'd like, hold on, I'm not so sure he was talking about, maybe if you looked at the recording, please use Ask the Expert button and we'll go back to a detailed reply. So, thank you for listening. I'm going to open up to question and answers.